I thought I'd give Porter some heart palpitations by coming up here without notes, but I have notes. Don't worry. So, Danielle Namamihatis and Margaret Madden and I have been listening to Jean Lenzner give these presentations for decades. Yes. I met Jean Lenzner when I was 25, and this is only the second year now that Jean has turned over this extraordinary task of introducing the Jean Lenzner Humanitarian Award honorees to you all before he did them all himself. And so I will say to you, Jean, not just tonight in this speech, but for all the days of my life, I will try to do as good a job as you have done in this space. I'll also say something I didn't tell Porter or any of the other honorees is that Jean likes to tell this joke about, I don't even know how long ago this happened. There was an honoree who, when he met Jean, said, "Oh, I assume because this award was named after you that you were no longer alive." And it was a long time ago, right? So one of the responsibilities in receiving this award for the three of you, Mary and Heather and Porter, is that you are now obligated to continue this extraordinary work until you're at least 94. So, is that fair? All right, so it is my distinct pleasure to introduce to you my friend and Jean Lenzner Humanitarian Award honoree, Porter Gilberg. Yes. Porter is a person that many of you know and who's familiar to many of you, and not because he's often honored at award ceremonies like this, but rather because he's apparently figured out some kind of time-space warping technique that allows him to be in all over town, working, advocating, being at events, supporting other people at all times of the day and night. I can't tell you how often I see Porter in the community. It's really extraordinary. I'm pleased to have known Porter as a colleague. Those of you who've seen him in action would agree he is both astute and a persistent advocate and leader. I think you heard the mayor say that earlier when he said pushing. He means pushing. He means advocating. He means not in-your-face violent advocacy, but rather consistent, regular, sticking to your guns and saying what needs to be said even when it feels uncomfortable. And while Porter's advocacy naturally focuses on the LGBTQ community as a result of his position as executive director of the Long Beach LGBTQ Center, he can also often be found supporting efforts around issues of racism, classism, immigration, and violence prevention. You probably won't be surprised to know that Porter's advocacy and leadership started at a young age. What I didn't know, however, before our interview, was that his advocacy began as self-preservation. It was standing up to those who were causing him harm personally. Porter was born in Texas and moved to California at 2 years old, but not to Long Beach. His family settled in a place called Wildemar that I'd never heard of, which is a, that's the truth, which is a very white, Christian, and conservative area of Riverside County, not far from Temecula and Murrieta, those places. He was the only Jewish kid in school growing up. And by the time he came out, or more correctly, was outed in middle school as part of the LGBTQ community, was certainly an outsider. Staff at the school told him he was going to hell. Students were hostile. His home was vandalized, and he received death threats as a child. In high school, Porter found some relief as fellow students became somewhat more accepting. But the adults, with one marked exception, his band teacher, were not. Eventually, he couldn't deal with the daily pressure and left the traditional high school to attend an accelerated continuation school and to begin taking community college classes long before graduating from high school. Porter was fortunate in many ways, despite his many significant challenges. His family and parents have supported him throughout, even as they struggle to understand and get immediately on board right away with things like pronouns and changes. Porter actually talks about this frequently, about how he has been able to help other people because of his own awareness of both oppression and privilege. It helps working now today with the LGBTQ Center with adults and young people who are often adults who have immigration status issues, or people who are struggling financially, or people who have issues around racism that they've experienced. Porter's deep understanding of these issues, in the business we call this intersectionality, comes partially from his lifelong dedication to learning and a particular interest in learning about LGBTQ history and social justice movements. I learned in the interview that in addition to being an advocate, Porter is also something of a nerd / policy wonk around the history of social justice movements, which only lends itself to more admiration on my part. Porter moved to Long Beach at age 18. He jokes that he chose Long Beach because the LGBTQ community is big enough that he didn't have to like every member of the community. I don't know if I was allowed to say that. I'm sorry. He loves every member of the community. He quickly jumped full speed into education and advocacy, studying at Long Beach City College, graduating with a degree in women's studies from UCLA and a master's in women's studies from Claremont. He was attracted immediately to the greater Los Angeles movement and music scene, which was known as queercore, and music had been a part of his early advocacy in life as well. He quickly became involved in political advocacy, including around Prop 22, which was the predecessor to Prop 8, and of course around Prop 8, walking door to door and eventually leading field organizing efforts. In our interview, Jean was there and asked Porter what kind of things he likes to do in his spare time, lending to his bona fides as a humanitarian, I suppose. And I kid you not, he said that one of his favorite activities is working at Pride Parade, which I was like, that's not exactly an extracurricular activity, but okay. But that's quintessential Porter. His volunteer and fun time are about creating an event that lifts up the LGBT community. So despite leaving you with the impression that Porter has reached some kind of a pinnacle of his career as executive director of such a great organization, he's continuing to break down barriers even within the LGBTQ community itself, and educate wider audiences about where we need to reach a place of safety and equality for all people. Porter's personal challenges didn't all disappear when he came to Long Beach. In fact, among leadership of LGBTQ serving organizations around the state and country, he represents a small minority of people who are gender nonconforming leaders of these organizations. Porter spends a significant amount of time openly discussing and providing training on issues of gender, gender identity, trans issues, how these issues relate and intersect with sexual orientation and attraction. I've had the great fortune of sitting through one of those trainings, and I will tell you, this is something I've studied for a long time, and I learned so much in just a couple of hours that Porter sat with us and was willing to answer difficult questions and talk about things that sometimes might be considered difficult to have in public conversation. Those educational and informal discussions about definitions of terms and how everyone does not fit nicely into a box are what CCEJ stands for, and certainly what Porter Gilberg stands for. And by doing this work, by working as hard as he works and speaking openly as much as he does, he's creating safe places for others. He's keeping others from experiencing the pain he himself experienced. It's selfless, it's brave, and it's exactly what I would call a humanitarian. So I was in Alaska until yesterday, taking some time for myself, and I found myself sitting in this parking lot at 8:30 in the morning, ready to go on a hike, except for the trail was snowy. It was also 21 degrees outside. I'm from Tucson, Arizona. That is like, no. I didn't exactly have the right shoes. I didn't exactly have the right coat, but I got out and I looked at the trailhead, and I decided to do the hike anyway. I decided for one reason. Anybody want to guess what that reason was? I saw a pair of footprints. And I saw a pair of footprints that were going all the way up the trail and all the way down the trail. So I was able to follow those footprints and know that someone that morning had already gone up the mountain and come down the mountain safely. So here in Long Beach, we don't have a lot of snow. But for the LGBTQ community, those footprints belong to Porter Gilberg. And fortunately, there are those who follow where he ventured to go. So thank you and congratulations, Porter. Please join us.
Thank you. That's really sweet. Thank you. And thank you, Wendy, for that really, really just incredible introduction. I really appreciate it. I'm going to really, really miss Wendy as she goes on to lead another organization. I know her support has been really, really an instrumental point in giving me strength as I've gone up a career trajectory at the LGBTQ Center. Same for Danielle. CCEJ has been one of the center's strongest community partners and one of our biggest champions at the center and one of the biggest champions of the LGBTQ community, specifically around intersectional work, because we don't just have one identity. All of us are made up of many identities, and CCEJ always knows that. So I'm incredibly grateful to the entire staff and board at CCEJ, and also to the entire staff, board, and volunteer base at the LGBTQ Center for having faith in me and giving me the opportunity to make a difference in our community. One of my favorite movies is The Times of Harvey Milk. It's a documentary about the politician who was one of the first openly LGBTQ people elected to public office in the United States. And in this movie, there is a moment where the then executive director of Chinese for Affirmative Action, Henry Durr, noted that before this one particular election, Harvey had ensured that these particular voting machines were selected because they were easier to use for non-English speaking people. And Henry said about Harvey that he never went to the Chinese community to ask which machines would be better. He just knew. And I think about this almost every day in my work at the center, and honestly almost every day when I wake up. Like, how did Harvey prepare himself to be a strong ally to the Chinese community? How did he just know what to do? Coming out of the closet as an LGBTQ person is not a singular event. It's a series of steps, a conversation with each and every new person that you meet, an opportunity to connect and be seen as you see yourself, because people rarely ever just know. And unlearning bias really works in the same way. Too often we acknowledge that bias and discrimination exist in the world, and we look to others as examples of these behaviors rather than reflect inward to how we perpetuate these actions ourselves. We fixate on the most egregious examples that fit our own narrative of what a bigot looks like, rather than ask ourselves how we are silencing the lived experiences of discrimination of those around us through our own words and actions. The bias that Harvey Milk experienced in his run for the San Francisco Board of Supervisors in the 1970s as a gay man was no less insidious than the attempted disenfranchisement of the Chinese community through the selection of a particular voting machine. Harvey saw that, and I reflect on this knowledge often as I approach my work in the LGBTQ community. I am committed to leading by example for my community and committed to unlearning the biases I have grown up with in a world that has afforded me advantages as a white, able-bodied person that are often still out of reach for those who do not share these immutable privileges. I'm committed to denouncing the discrimination and dismissiveness I continue to experience as a queer, gender nonconforming person, as steadfastly as I am committed to working with other marginalized people and communities who continue to fight daily for respect for, rather than denigration of, their difference from others around them. I am committed to this work both within and outside the LGBTQ community, and I feel stronger knowing that we have organizations like CCEJ to help us lead the way to eventually just knowing how to be better to people and to one another and to our many communities, just like Harvey. So thank you very much.